A leather-clad officer steps from a Kubowagen. In his hand, the unmistakable silhouette of the MP40. We have seen this image 1,000 times. Cinema turned this weapon into the ultimate symbol of the Third Reich. Every soldier in the frame seems to carry one. But the movies lied. In 1942, German squads were often desperate. They threw away their own submachine guns for captured Soviet trophies. The reality of the Eastern Front didn't match the propaganda. Most soldiers still gripped the wooden stocks of bolt-action rifles. The contrast was deafening. One loud mechanical crack of a Mauser versus the rhythmic chatter of automatic fire. At the start of the 20th century, generals obsessed over distance. They wanted power. They demanded precision. The standard infantry rifle was over 1 meter long. It could kill a man at 1,000 meters. Then came the mud of the Great War. The long-range dream died in the trenches. Heavy bolt-action rifles became useless clubs in the dark. Armies realized they didn't need distance, they needed speed. This shifted the focus from the horizon to the next 5 meters. By the end of the conflict, the submachine gun was born. It was the complete opposite of everything the military elite believed in. Bolt-action rifles dominated the battlefields of the early century. The traditional bolt-action rifle was a masterpiece of engineering. 5 shots, accurate up to 1,000 meters, over 1 meter of polished wood and steel. But in the mud of 1914, these masterpieces became liabilities. Why did the Great War stall? Aerial reconnaissance eliminated the element of surprise. Quick-firing artillery and water-cooled machine guns turned open fields into slaughterhouses. The war sank into the earth. Imagine the trench. It is narrow, cramped. The walls are slick with wet clay. A soldier tries to turn, but his 60-inch rifle barrel jams into the dirt wall. He is trapped by his own weapon. The front line was a deadlock of millions, yet the real war shifted to small raiding parties. Men crawled through no man's land under the cover of darkness. They dropped into enemy trenches for savage, close-quarters combat. A 100-pound Maxim gun was useless here. A 5-shot rifle was a clumsy club. Revolvers offered too little firepower. The world's militaries were desperate for a trench broom. The Germans moved first, arming their elite Stoßtruppen with a new class of weapon. To sell his own version, John Thompson coined a catchy marketing term: the submachine gun. The Americans had a name for it. The Germans had the iron. Theodore Bergmann and designer Hugo Schmeisser rejected the old way. Converting light pistols to full auto failed. They were too light, uncontrollable, pieces of vibrating scrap metal. In 1918, they delivered the world's first practical answer, the MP40. It was a trench sweeper, a heavy industrial tool built for one purpose: clearing dirt tunnels of human life. It carried a 32-round drum magazine, 9mm pistol rounds. Fire rate, up to 500 rounds per minute. Was it enough to break the stalemate? Special stormtrooper units took the MP40 into the German Spring Offensive. They introduced walking fire. No more bolt-action aiming, just a continuous spray of lead at waist height. The tactical shock was absolute. Allied soldiers, accustomed to the slow rhythm of rifles, faced a wall of automatic fire in the dark of the trenches. 30,000 units reached the front. In an army of millions, it was a drop in the bucket. But the psychological weight was massive. The offensive failed, but the concept survived. The world's militaries watched the trenches of 1918 and realized the era of the long rifle was dying. Nearly every major power began developing their own version of the German machine. The world's engineers studied the MP40 like a textbook. Every submachine gun designed until 1945 carried Schmeisser's DNA. Italy produced the Velar Perosa, a bizarre twin-barrel experiment. America built the Thompson in .45 caliber. But while others copied the past, Germany was already engineering the next war. The Treaty of Versailles forbade them from building submachine guns. They ignored it. Secretly, the MP28 entered production. Designers scrapped the complex snail drum for a simple, reliable box magazine. It was a weapon of quiet refinement under the nose of international inspectors. 1936 changed everything. the Spanish Civil War became a live laboratory for German steel. In the ruins of Spanish towns, the Wehrmacht tested a new doctrine. They saw that even in a mobile war, the submachine gun ruled the streets. The trench was dead, but the urban meat grinder was just beginning. The military leadership issued a new requirement for a compact folding weapon. Heinrich Vollmer's response to the military's new requirement looked like a prop from a science fiction film. In 1938, he presented the MP38. It was a radical departure from the heavy, wood-stocked carbines of the past. Vollmer stripped away the walnut and the oak. He replaced them with cold steel and a folding metal stock. The design was born from the cramped reality of modern war. Imagine a panzer crewman. He needs to bail out of a narrow hatch in seconds. A long rifle is a death sentence. He folds the stock, tucks the weapon under his arm, and exits. It was the first submachine gun of its kind. No wood, purely functional. The receiver was machined steel. The grips were made of bakelite, an early, brittle form of plastic. It looked advanced. It felt modern. But the battlefield quickly exposed a flaw. How did soldiers handle a weapon that turned into a furnace? Bakelite and steel conduct heat far better than wood. After 3 magazines, the foregrip became untouchable. The smell of scorched plastic filled the air. In thousands of archival photos, the detail is always there. Soldiers are wearing thick leather gloves even in the summer heat. They had no choice. Without protection, the MP38 would sear the skin off their palms. Vollmer moved the charging handle to the left side. The logic was simple. A soldier keeps his right hand on the trigger while his left clears a jam or swaps a magazine. It used the reliable open-bolt blowback system. It spat 9mm parabellum rounds at 500 shots per minute. It was the old MP18 spirit in a futuristic shell. The High Command was impressed. They adopted the weapon immediately in 1938. But industrial reality lagged behind the blitzkrieg theory. When the Wehrmacht crossed the Polish border, the weapon was a rarity. Most squads still relied on bolt-action rifles. Across the entire invasion force, the army had only 8,000 units. 8,000 units were a drop in the ocean for the blitzkrieg. To arm millions, the Wehrmacht needed a weapon built for the factory line, not the master gunsmith. Engineers stripped the design to its bones. They threw away expensive milled parts. In their place came stamped sheet metal and spot welds. It was a revolution in efficiency. Stamped steel allowed factories to churn out weapons where they once made simple kitchen pots. Why did everyone call it the Schmeisser? The name was stamped on every magazine. Hugo Schmeisser held the patent for the 32-round box, but he never touched the MP40 design itself. It was a branding error that became a legend. The early rush for numbers had a cost. Metal pressings lacked precision. Mud and grit turned the first mass-produced batches into heavy clubs. Jams were constant. Then there was the safety, or the lack of one. A dropped MP38 could empty its magazine into the man standing next to you. The MP40 fixed the danger. Designers added a dual-slot safety notch to the bolt handle. You could lock it open or closed. No more accidental discharges in the back of a truck. With the flaws buried, the Reich opened the gates. Production lines shifted into high gear. Industry transformed into a machine for spitting out steel. 57 Reichsmarks. That was the price of one MP40. In today's money, it equals $1,200. Not cheap, especially compared to the American Thompson. One Thompson cost over $2,000. The MP40 was a bargain, but it was still a luxury. The numbers tell the real story. Industry churned out 1 million MP40s. It became the second most produced automatic weapon in the Wehrmacht. Only the MG-34 saw more production units. But look at the Kar 98K, 14 million rifles. The German army remained an army of bolt-action carbines, not submachine guns. Was it possible to go cheaper? The Americans thought so. They looked at the MP40 and stripped it down. They created the M3 grease gun. Total cost, $300. The British went even further with the Sten. It cost half as much as a grease gun. Production became a race to the bottom. matching the brutal efficiency of the Soviet PPSH. Industry transformed into a factory of disposable steel. The Reich spent 57 marks per unit, while the front swallowed thousands of guns every week. Money bought firepower, but it couldn't keep up with the losses. Production lines ran 24 hours a day to replace the iron left in the mud. The MP40 was never the standard rifle of the Wehrmacht. It was a tool of hierarchy. Because of high costs and rigid doctrine, a regular private rarely held one. He only saw it in the hands of his superior. The German infantry squad followed a strict blueprint. At the center stood the machine gun, the MG-34 or the newer MG-42. A three-man team operated the weapon. The gunner pulled the trigger. His assistant fed the belts. The ammo bearer hauled the heavy metal boxes. 6 other soldiers carried bolt-action Kar 98K rifles. Their only job was to protect the machine gun team. The squad leader stood apart. He was the only one armed with the MP40. Heavy canvas pouches hung from his belt. 6 magazines sat inside, 3 on each side. He carried a small metal tool to load them, and a Luger or P-38 as a backup. The submachine gun wasn't there to win the firefight. It was for the leader's self-defense while the machine gun did the killing. Paratroopers and tank crews received the weapon first. A full-length wooden rifle was a liability inside a cramped panzer or a Junkers transport. They needed the folding stock. They needed the compact frame. But the social order of the squad collapsed when the German army reached the Eastern Front. In the ruins of Stalingrad, the old hierarchy met the Soviet Red Army. The rigid hierarchy of the German squad shattered in the ruins of Stalingrad. Here, the clean lines of the MP40 met the chaotic reality of close-quarters urban slaughter. A German soldier crouches behind a jagged brick wall. He drops his empty MP40 into the gray dust. He reaches for a discarded Soviet weapon. Why use the enemy's tools? Because in these ruins, the Soviet PPSH-41 was the only thing that worked. The Red Army didn't just fight, they overwhelmed. For every German submachine gun produced, the Soviets built 6. 6 to 1. That is the mathematics of defeat. The characteristic frantic crackle of the PPSH echoed through every cellar. It was the sound of superior fire volume. Berlin's engineers had created a masterpiece. Moscow's factories created a solution. The shortage of MP40s became a crisis. Logistics failed. Frontline units began to scavenge. First, they used captured Soviet guns as they found them. Then, the desperation turned into a systematic program. German armorers took the Soviet frame. They swapped the barrels. They added an adapter for German magazines. They converted 10,000 units to fire 9mm rounds. It didn't stop there. Soldiers discovered a technical fluke. The Soviet weapon could fire German 7.63 Mauser ammunition without any modification at all. Supply lines became irrelevant. The enemy provided the gun, and the old pistol stocks provided the bullets. The industrial irony was complete. The PPSH-41 became the second most common submachine gun in the entire Wehrmacht. The irony was sharp. The captured Soviet PPSH-41 spat lead twice as fast as the German original. In a ruined basement, fire rate was the only statistic that mattered. The Russian Papasha delivered 1,200 rounds per minute. It was a wall of lead. You stepped into a room, squeezed the trigger, and emptied the magazine in under 2 seconds. Everyone inside stayed down. The 9mm round had more stopping power, but the 7.62 Tokarev was faster. It pierced winter coats and light cover at distances where the MP40 struggled. The German machine pistol was a different tool. It weighed 4 kilograms unloaded. That weight was a burden on the march, but a blessing in the burst. It absorbed recoil. It stayed on target. At 100 meters, a soldier could actually aim. But the folding stock was a weak point. After months of recoil and dirt, the steel joints wobbled. The precision of German engineering dissolved into a rattling frame. German high command tried to close the gap. They designed the MP40/1 with a dual magazine feed. It was a desperate answer to the Soviet 71-round drum. Only a few hundred reached the front. The mechanism was heavy, clunky, and prone to jamming. Soldiers ignored the factory solutions. They took two standard magazines and bound them together with tape or wire. They called it jungle style. One magazine emptied, a flick of the wrist, and the next was ready. It was a crude fix for a lethal problem. The magazine remained the most fragile part of the entire system. The magazine was a masterpiece of flawed engineering. It turned the MP40 into a gamble. On paper, it held 32 rounds. In the mud, it held a soldier's life in a fragile grip. The design used a single feed system. Two columns of cartridges merged into one at the very top. One grain of sand at that narrow neck could freeze the entire weapon. The American Thompson avoided this with a double feed layout, loading from both sides. But the Germans stuck to the old MP18 blueprint. Thin steel, tight tolerances. Loading was a slow torture for the hands. The soldier took the loader tool from his kit. He slid it over the magazine top. One press, one click. Without it, his thumbs would be bruised and raw after 6 magazines. The spring was the true enemy. Soldiers never filled all 32 rounds. They stopped at 28 or 30. Total compression killed the spring's tension. It was a silent pact with physics. Give up 4 bullets to ensure the 5th actually fires. Dust and grit turned the oil inside into a grinding paste. Veterans spent hours cleaning the internal walls. They knew the manual by heart, but ignored the most basic reflex. The manual strictly forbade holding the gun by the magazine. In the panic of a trench fight, men gripped the steel housing anyway. The magazine would tilt just a fraction of a millimeter. The bolt would slam into a jammed casing. The blowback system itself was reliable from the African heat to the Russian frost. It was simple and robust, but the delivery of the lead was a delicate, temperamental process. Allied intelligence officers noted the trend in captured reports. British and American experts evaluated the weapon with professional coldness. Captured reports didn't just reveal technical flaws, they exposed a lethal psychological trap. The sound of the MP40 was its own worst enemy. The German submachine gun had a distinctive metallic chatter. Allied soldiers recognized that rhythm instantly. It meant enemy. This acoustic signature turned every captured weapon into a potential death sentence for its new owner. On the chaotic battlefields of Europe, your own side's ears were more dangerous than the Germans' eyes. Take June 6, 1944, Point du Hoc. U.S. Rangers scaled the cliffs under a hail of fire. In the heat of the assault, some Americans discarded their jammed weapons and grabbed MP40s from dead Germans. It was a logical choice for survival. It became a fatal mistake. The Rangers moved through the smoke, firing the captured guns. Their comrades heard the German burp and reacted with muscle memory. They didn't see the uniform, they only heard the threat. Later reports confirmed the tragedy. 4 Rangers lay dead from friendly fire. They were found clutching German weapons. Confusion killed faster than the enemy. American troops soon developed a deep distrust for the trophy. It wasn't just the risk of blue-on-blue incidents. The math didn't add up. The 9mm Luger round lacked the stopping power of the heavy .45 ACP. A Thompson or an M3 grease gun hit like a sledgehammer. The MP40 felt like a toy by comparison. The M3 was the peak of American pragmatism. It looked like a garage tool. It lacked a charging handle, forcing the soldier to cock the bolt with a finger through a cutout. The stock was just bent wire. The safety was a crude metal flap. It was ugly. It was cheap, but it didn't sound like a German. The British took this minimalism even further with the Sten. It was a 9mm tube built for pennies. Yet, despite the flood of submachine guns, the core of the war remained unchanged. The German High Command still built their entire infantry doctrine around the bolt-action rifle. The era of the pistol bullet ended in the mud of 1944. German High Command finally faced the data. Most firefights didn't happen at 1,000 meters. They happened at less than 300. The bolt-action rifle was too slow. The MP40 was too weak. The solution was the intermediate round, a bullet caught between two worlds. Not a massive rifle slug, not a tiny pistol grain. They called it the 7.92 by 33 mm. This was the birth of the Sturmgewehr, the STG-44. The machine was a hybrid. It carried a 30-round magazine. It offered full auto fire for the chaos of a trench. But unlike the MP40, it stayed lethal at 400 meters. By 1944, the Reich made a choice. The Sturmgewehr replaced the MP40 in both the factories and the manuals. It was a leap in evolution. 400,000 units left the assembly lines. It was too late to save the Reich. It was just in time to change the world. The war ended before the concept reached perfection, but the silhouette remained. Even a casual glance reveals the unmistakable lines of its successor, the AK-47.